understood what is a constitution, let's look at various types of constitutions that we come across. Constitution can be either written or unwritten, can be enacted or evolved, and can be unitary or federal. Let's look at what is a written constitution and what is an unwritten constitution. Written constitution, for example, India, United States of America. United States of America, their constitution we mostly refer as the oldest federal constitution of the world. Indian constitution and the US constitution, these are written constitutions, or we call them codified constitutions. For example, if you ask me, sir, show me the Constitution of India, I take out a bulky book and tell you this is the Constitution of India. Sir, show me the Constitution of United States. I'll take out another pamphlet and tell you this is the Constitution of United States. Which means the Constitution of India and the Constitution of United States and many other constitutions of the world, they are written because they are codified into one single document. For example, the Constitution of India, it starts with preamble. Then part 1 of the Constitution, it deals with union and its territory. Part 2 deals with citizenship. Part 3 deals with fundamental rights. Part 4 deals with directive principles of state policy. Part 5 deals with union, so on and so forth. That means Indian Constitution is a written constitution because it has been written and codified into various parts into one single document. The Constitution of United States of America consists of 7 articles and it has been amended 27 times. So what is a written constitution? A written constitution is one where the laws are written and codified into one single document. This is the Constitution of India. This is the Constitution of United States. Since these constitutions are written and codified into various parts into one single document, we say these constitutions are written or codified constitutions. Then there are some constitutions which are unwritten. For example, Constitution of United Kingdom, Israel, New Zealand. We call these constitutions as unwritten. That doesn't mean that laws in these countries are not written. It only means that laws are not codified into one single document. There is no single document which we can call as the Constitution of United Kingdom, because United Kingdom Constitution is unwritten because not all laws are written, and these laws are not written and codified into one single document. Now you might ask, sir, why is it that UK Constitution is not codified into one single document? No effort has been made. If tomorrow the political class of United Kingdom believes and feels that there is a need to codify all these constitutional principles into one single document, they might well do that. Which means UK Constitution is an unwritten constitution because it has not been codified into one single document, or no effort has been made to codify all these laws into one single document. But this is not where the difference ends. In unwritten constitution, conventions play a very important role. What are the conventions? Conventions are unwritten rules. Rules that we follow, but they are not mentioned anywhere, they are not written anywhere, but these are conventions, unwritten rules that we follow. And in an unwritten constitution, these conventions, these unwritten rules, they play a very important role. That is why we call these constitutions as unwritten. Few examples. Money bill can be initiated only in the House of Commons. If you look at the British Parliament, it is bicameral. Bicameral in the sense that there are 2 houses. House of Commons, lower house. House of Lords, upper house. It is not mentioned anywhere, but there is a convention that a money bill should be introduced only in the House of Commons. It is not mentioned anywhere, but it is a convention that we follow that in the election, if we have a Speaker of the House of Commons and the Speaker of the House of Commons is contesting the election, no other political party can set up a candidate against the Speaker. That is why we say in Britain, once a Speaker, always a Speaker. If I am elected as the Speaker, in the next election, where I am contesting election from my constituency, the convention is, the unwritten rule is that no political party should set up a candidate against the Speaker. It's not mentioned anywhere, but it's a convention. The convention also is that the Prime Minister of UK should be from the House of Commons. It's not mentioned anywhere in the Constitution, but it's a convention. That means Constitution can be either written or unwritten. So what's the difference? Long story short, a written Constitution is one where the laws are written and codified into one single document. For example, India, for example, United States. An unwritten Constitution is one where laws are written, but they are not codified into one single document. Why? Because no effort has been made. Two, in an unwritten Constitution, conventions play a very important role. We treat these conventions, although they are not written, they are unwritten. We treat these conventions also as part of the Constitution. For example, the convention is whatever advice is given by Prime Minister of Britain to the Queen is binding on the Queen. Is it mentioned anywhere? No. It is unwritten. It's a convention and they have to follow it. The Prime Minister should be from House of Commons. The money bill should originate in the House of Commons. Money bill cannot be rejected by the House of the Lords. These are all conventions, unwritten rules, not mentioned anywhere, but something that they follow. That means UK Constitution is an unwritten Constitution. There is one more difference. In a written Constitution, Constitution is supreme. Sir, what does that mean? That means Parliament cannot violate the Constitution. No law can be passed by the Parliament which will violate the Constitution. Constitution is the supreme law of land when it comes to a written Constitution. In a written Constitution, Constitution is supreme. But in an unwritten Constitution, who is supreme? Parliament is supreme. This is where we say Parliament in UK is sovereign. One British constitutional expert, D. Lolme, he said British Parliament can do anything except convert a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Now don't call me sexist. Why am I not including a transgender? This is the quote of D. Lolme. So hold him accountable for saying this. But what he says is British Parliament can do anything except convert a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Which means, long story short, British Parliament can do anything. British Parliament can make any kind of law. British Parliament can do anything. There is nothing which limits the power of the Parliament because they have an unwritten constitution. And in an unwritten constitution, Constitution is not supreme. The Parliament is supreme. It is something else. In a written constitution, there is a difference between an ordinary law and a constitutional law. For example, Citizenship Act is an ordinary law. Aadhaar is an ordinary law. Child labor law is an ordinary law. Raising the minimum legal age of marriage for girls is an ordinary law. Fundamental right is a constitutional law. Directive principles of state policy, part of the Constitution. Anti-defection law, part of the Constitution. That means there is a difference between an ordinary law and a constitutional law. If you want to change an ordinary law, Parliament needs simple majority. If you want to change a constitutional law, Parliament needs a special majority. But in an unwritten constitution, such as United Kingdom, there exists no difference between an ordinary law and a constitutional law. British Parliament, through an ordinary law, by passing a law by a simple majority can make any changes. For example, I'll give you latest example. A law was passed in the year 2011 called Fixed Term Parliaments Act. What does this law say? This law said that there should be a fixed term for the British Parliament. The House of Commons that we have in Britain, there should be a fixed term of 5 years. After 5 years, there will be fresh elections. But there can be no election midway. That means the term of the Parliament is fixed for 5 years. This term of Parliament, which is fixed for 5 years, can change only in two situations. Which are these two situations? If Parliament passes a resolution by 2/3 majority calling for a fresh election in Britain, only then can a fresh election take place midway. Sir, what does that mean? The term of the British Parliament is 5 years. And this term is fixed. Which means once the 5-year term is over, only then can we have the fresh election. But this 5-year term can be ended midway only in two situations. Situation number one, if Parliament itself passes a resolution by 2/3 majority saying now we should have a fresh election. This is condition number one. Condition number two, if a vote of no confidence is issued against a Prime Minister. Prime Minister of Britain holds office as long as he enjoys majority in the House of Commons. The moment he loses majority, he is voted out of power. He loses his power. But the term of the Parliament is fixed for 5 years. Which means if the Prime Minister loses his majority midway during this 5-year term, we need another Prime Minister, but from the same Parliament. But if a new government is not possible within 14 days, then we will have a fresh election, even without completing 5 years. So this is slightly complicated. I'll make it simple. Fixed Term Parliament Act of 2011. What does it say? It says that the term of the Parliament is fixed for 5 years. 5-year term is over, then we will have fresh election. But can this 5-year term be ended midway? Yes. But for that, two conditions, or one of the two conditions, should be satisfied. Condition number one, Parliament itself should pass a resolution by 2/3 majority saying we should go for fresh elections, even without completing 5-year term. If not, then if a vote of no confidence is issued against the Prime Minister, if the opposition says in British Parliament that we don't have the confidence in the Prime Minister loses his job. Prime Minister loses her job. And then, if within 14 days no new government is possible, then we will dissolve the House of Commons, then fresh election will take place. Many people argued in Britain that this is a very bad law. Why should a term of Parliament be fixed for 5 years? Prime Minister at any point in time can advise the Queen that you dissolve the Parliament so that we can have fresh election. This law, Fixed Term Parliaments Act of 2011, was repealed in March 2022 when Parliament of Britain passed another law called Dissolution and Calling of Parliament Act, DCPA, under which the Prime Minister can advise the Queen at any point in time that you dissolve the House of Commons so that we can have fresh elections. That means an ordinary law was passed by simple majority to repeal a previous law and to enforce another law and to pass another law. This cannot happen in India. In India, if we have to change the constitution, we need special majority to change the constitution. And I'll tell you something else. In India, there is another limitation on the Parliament. And that limitation is the doctrine of basic structure. This doctrine was invented by the Supreme Court of India in a landmark Keshavananda Bharati versus State of Kerala case in 1973, where Supreme Court imposed a limitation on the Parliament. That Parliament, You can make any change to the constitution, but don't you dare touch the basic structure of the constitution. Parliament has the power to change the constitution, amend the constitution, but there are some fundamental features of the constitution. There are some basic features of the constitution which you cannot change. For example, secularism is part of the basic structure. Federalism is part of the basic structure. Parliamentary democracy is part of the basic structure. Rule of law is part of the basic structure. Free and fair election is part of the basic structure. Independence of judiciary is part of the basic structure. No law of the parliament can violate these basic structures, can repeal these basic structures, can delete these basic structures. So there is a limitation on the power of the parliament when it comes to India, because India has a written constitution. And in a written constitution, there are some basic features which parliament cannot change, which parliament cannot repeal, which parliament cannot modify. This limitation does not extend when it comes to Britain, because in Britain, parliament can do anything except convert a man into a woman and a woman into a man. Long story short, constitution can be either written or unwritten. Very simply, what is a written constitution? Laws are written and codified into one single document. In unwritten constitution, not all laws are written. But even when the laws are written, they are not codified into one single document. Why? Because no effort has been made. Two, conventions play a very important role. Unwritten rules, which are not mentioned anywhere, but they follow it. That's why we call this constitution unwritten constitution. And in an unwritten constitution, parliament is supreme, parliament is sovereign. And in an unwritten constitution, there exists no difference between an ordinary law and a constitutional law. Which means British parliament can make any changes, can pass any kind of law, can repeal any other law as well. This is a written and an unwritten constitution. Now, constitution can also be either enacted or it can be evolved. For example, Indian constitution is enacted. US constitution is enacted. US, if you look at North America, there were 13 British colonies, just like India was a colony of the British Empire. In a similar fashion, there were some territories in North America which were under the control of the Britain. These were the 13 British colonies. Now, these 13 British colonies in North America revolted. That is what we call American War of Independence, which you will study in world history. These 13 British colonies, they revolted and they liberated themselves. They declared themselves as independent. Now, these 13 erstwhile British colonies, who were previously British colonies, now they have liberated themselves. These 13 territories decided to come together. They decided to come together to create United States of America, which means United States of America was not a political entity. It was non-existent. It was created when these 13 territories, after they revolted against the British Empire, they liberated themselves in American War of Independence. They declared themselves sovereign. Now they have decided to come together to create this political entity called United States of America. But they wanted a written structure as to how should we govern ourselves. What sort of democracy should we strive for? What should be the role and the responsibility of the various territories? For that they came together at Philadelphia. The year was 1787. They wrote their constitution. And this constitution came into force in 1789. That means one specific body, one specific institution was created so that this body can write the constitution. This body can write what should be the political system, what should be the rights available to the people, what should be the role of the center, what should be the role of the states. All this was mentioned when in 1787, these 13 territories gave themselves a constitution, a written constitution as to how should govern ourselves. That means this entire constitution came into force in one single go in 1789, which means it was enacted. It was enacted by a body. This body was specifically tasked to write the constitution. And this constitution came into force in one single go in 1789, which means US constitution is enacted. It was enacted by a body which was tasked, which was given the responsibility to write this constitution. Similar to India. 1946, I told you, Cabinet Mission was sent to India. Cabinet Mission promised a constituent assembly. Constituent assembly, one body, which was specifically tasked with writing the constitution. This constitution was adopted on 26 November 1949. This constitution came into force on 26 January 1950. I'll tell you the reason later why it was adopted on 26 November 1949, but it came into force on 26 January 1950. We'll discuss that when we will discuss the preamble. But here, very briefly, for the sake of understanding, Indian Constitution is enacted because it was passed, it was written, it was drafted by one single body specifically tasked with writing the Constitution. So Indian Constitution is enacted. US Constitution is enacted. But British Constitution is evolved. It keeps on evolving over a period of time. Evolved? The year was 1215. Magna Carta was passed. The big law was passed, which is considered to be part of the British Constitution. Magna Carta, which says, no free man shall be imprisoned. Magna Carta, which says, we'll have to separate state from church. Church will deal with religious functions. State will not be influenced by the church. State and church shall be separated from each other. Religion and state will not be in a position to influence each other. Who says this? Magna Carta of 1215, which is considered to be part of the British Constitution. Then came the Bill of Rights in 1698. Bill of Rights, which said there should be periodic elections. There should be regular elections where people will elect their representatives to the parliament. Bill of Rights, which talked about what should be the order of the succession. That means the Queen is the head. After the Queen, who will occupy the throne? This is mentioned in the Bill of Rights. Then came 1928, Representation of the People Equal Franchise Act, which gave the right to every single adult to vote in the elections, to elect their representatives. Then came the Human Rights Act of 1998. We don't have to discuss these laws in great detail. I just want to draw your attention to one important fact. And what is that fact? This is Indian Constitution. Preamble, Union and its territory, citizenship, fundamental rights, directive principles. They came into force in one single go. Right? So Indian Constitution is enacted. Why enacted? Because one body was created, was set up to write this constitution. And this constitution came into force in one single go. But look at the Constitution of England. It is evolving over a period of time. So one body was not specifically tasked to write this constitution. So there is no body, there is no institution which has been given the responsibility to write the British Constitution. Instead, British Constitution has evolved over a period of time. Magna Carta of 1215, Bill of Rights 1689, Representation of the People Equal Franchise Act 1928, Human Rights Act of 1998. It is evolving over a period of time. That means British Constitution is evolved. It is evolving over a period of time. It is not enacted. Indian Constitution is enacted. US Constitution is enacted. But there is another question on your mind. And I know that question. I can anticipate it. Sir, you said US Constitution has 7 articles and it has been amended 27 times. Does that not mean that US Constitution is also evolving over a period of time? Right? It's an Indian Constitution. It was enacted in 1950. But Indian Constitution has been amended 105 times till 2022. Does that not mean that Indian Constitution is also evolving over a period of time? Quite right. Both constitutions evolve. But look at the enacted constitution. This enacted constitution, the bulk of it was passed, was written, was drafted by a body which was specifically asked to write the constitution. So a specific body was asked in United States of America to write the constitution for United States. A constituent assembly was set up in India to write the constitution of India. There was no constituent assembly set up in Britain to write the British constitution. There was no constituent assembly set up in Britain to write all these laws. It has been evolving over a period of time. That is why we say British constitution is evolved. So then what is the difference or similarity between a written constitution and an enacted constitution? An unwritten constitution and evolved constitution. Written constitutions are enacted. Unwritten constitutions are evolved constitutions. So long story short, constitution can be either written or unwritten. Constitutions can be either enacted or constitutions can be evolved. But the bigger difference, the most important difference for you to understand is constitution can be either unitary or constitution can be federal. And if you understand this difference, I can proudly say that you have understood half of Indian polity. You might have heard of these allegations. This government is against federalism. We need to come together as opposition because the central government is violating the norms of federalism. We need to strengthen federalism. Federalism, 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 ad nauseum. This term federalism is thrown in the newspapers. What is a unitary constitution and what is a federal constitution? Unitary constitution, for example, South Africa. Unitary constitution, for example, United Kingdom. These are the examples of unitary constitution. But how do I make you understand a unitary constitution? Let me give you a hypothetical situation. This is India. We have the central government. Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, his ministers. Clear? This is the central government. We have state governments as well. We have governments in Rajasthan. We have governments in Karnataka. We have Mr. Stalin in Tamil Nadu. We have Mamata Didi in West Bengal. We have Mr. Yogi Adityanath in Uttar Pradesh. We have these state governments as well. So there is government at the center, there is government in the states. The government at the center is responsible for the defense of India. The government at the center is responsible for foreign affairs. Subramaniam Jaishankar is the foreign minister of India, minister of external affairs. What should be India's position on Russia-Ukraine conflict? What should be India's position on Iranian nuclear deal? What should be India's position in United Nations? This is decided by the center. Are states involved here? No. This is the complete domain, prerogative of the center. Who is going to be the citizen of India? Center decides. Who is not going to be the citizen of India? That center decides. But how should we manage law and order? That Rajasthan takes its own decision. Karnataka takes its own decision. Kerala takes its own decision. What should be the policy of the states when it comes to land? That states decide. What should be the policy on gambling? That states decides. What should be the policy on agriculture? That states decides. That means there is clear-cut distribution of powers. Some powers are given to the center, some powers are given to the states. We have a government at the center, we have the government in the states as well. Let's assume for a while that this system does not exist. We have only the government at the center which takes control of everything. We have only the government at the center which takes decision for the entire country. We have only the parliament at the center which makes laws for the entire country. In India right now, parliament can make a law, but the Legislative Assembly of Uttar Pradesh also makes it law. Legislative Assembly of West Bengal also makes a law. Legislative Assembly of Kerala and Karnataka, Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Punjab, they also make their own laws. That means laws passed by the states are valid within that state. Laws passed by the parliament are valid throughout the country. What if there is no state legislative assembly? What if there is no state government? Such a system is a unitary setup. Such a constitution is a unitary constitution. So a unitary constitution is one where all the powers are concentrated in the center. All the powers are concentrated in the center. Whether these are legislative powers or executive powers, all powers are concentrated in the center. So you can assume that if India was a unitary constitution, there would only be the Parliament of India, there won't be legislative assemblies. There would be only the Prime Minister and the ministers at the center, and they will control the entire country. You won't see a chief minister, you won't see a state minister. This is a unitary constitution, and such a system exists in South Africa. Such a system exists in United Kingdom. These are the examples of unitary constitution, where all the powers are concentrated in the center. But then, contrasting it, we have a federal polity. We have a federal setup. We have a federal constitution. But if you ask me, so what is the definition of a unitary constitution? I'll tell you, unitary constitution is one where all the powers, be it legislative, administrative, executive, are concentrated in one strong center. That is a unitary constitution. But if you ask me, sir, tell me the definition of a federal constitution, I cannot tell you. Because there is no such definition of a federal constitution. But then how do we know? How can we say whether a constitution is federal or unitary? Is Indian constitution federal or unitary? Is Canadian constitution federal or unitary? Is Australian constitution federal or unitary? Is German constitution, Weimar constitution, federal or unitary? How do we know that? We have to compare the constitution with the Constitution of United States of America. And United States of America, I told you, is the oldest, or considered to be the oldest federal constitution of the world. That is why whenever there are talks between India and United States, we say the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy have decided to come together. Largest democracy, India. Oldest democracy, United States of America. That's what people say. So there is no definition of a federal constitution. Constitutional experts, what do? If they have to look at a constitution and decide whether this constitution is federal or unitary, they compare this constitution with the Constitution of United States of America. If this constitution matches the US Constitution, it is federal. If it doesn't match, then it is something else. But what are these characteristics which make US Constitution a federal constitution? There are 5 important characteristics. Characteristic number 1, dual government. One government at the center, government in every state as well. There is one government headed by Joe Biden. There is government in every state in United States of America as well. All the 50 states of US have their own governments. Michigan, Florida, Illinois, all these states have their own governments as well. And then there is a central government headed by Joe Biden. Dual government. Characteristic number 2, distribution of powers. Some powers are given to the center, some powers are given to the states. clear-cut distribution of powers. The powers which are available to the center, states cannot interfere. The powers which are given to the states, center cannot interfere. Clear-cut distribution of powers. Third important characteristic which makes US Constitution a federal polity, a federal constitution. Constitution should be written. Because we can't rely on conventions. We can't rely on unwritten rules. Constitution should be written. So that this written constitution talks about dual government. This written constitution has distributed powers, given some powers to the center, given some powers to the states. Constitution has to be written. And at the same time, this constitution should be rigid. Sir, what do we mean by rigidity of the constitution? Rigidity does not mean that constitution should be very difficult to amend, should be very difficult to change. No. Rigidity means that if this constitution is to be changed, both center as well as states should come together to change this constitution. This constitution should not be unilaterally changed by the center. This constitution should not be unilaterally changed by the states. If at all this constitution is to be amended, if at all this constitution has to be changed, it must be the joint act of both the center as well as states. Both center as well as the states, they have to come together to change this constitution. What is it? Rigidity of the constitution. That's what happens in the United States. If the constitution of US has to change, both center and states, they have to agree. And at the same time, judiciary should be independent. Because what if there is a clash between the center and the state? To resolve this clash, center may say we will change the constitution on our own. States will say we will change the constitution. Center will say this is our power. States will say no, this is our power. What is exactly mentioned in the constitution needs to be interpreted as well in case there is a dispute. This dispute between the center and the state should be resolved by an independent judiciary. Independent judiciary which should not be biased in favor of the center, biased against the state. Biased in favor of the state, biased against the center. Judiciary should be independent. It should be in an independent situation to independently, impartially, without any bias, without taking sides, uphold this written constitution. These are the 5 characteristics which make US Constitution a federal constitution. Dual government, distribution of powers, written constitution, rigidity of the constitution, and independent judiciary. And any constitution which matches these characteristics is a federal constitution. If it doesn't match, then it's a unitary or some other type of a constitution. By looking at these 5 characteristics, what do you think of India? What do you think of Indian constitution? Are we federal? Perhaps yes. Why? Do we have dual government? Yes. There's government headed by the President of India, the Prime Minister, Council of Ministers, and there is government of the Chief Ministers as well, the governors as well. Dual government. Do we have distribution of powers? Yes, we have. If you look at the Indian Constitution, there is something called Schedule 7 of the Constitution. Schedule 7, which we will discuss in great detail in Center-State Relations chapter, but very briefly here. Schedule 7 distributes the powers into union list, state list, and concurrent list. All the items which are mentioned in the union list, only the central parliament has the power to make laws. For example, defense, external affairs, communication, banking, insurance. On all these matters, who has the power to make law? Only the Parliament of India. Then there are matters mentioned in the state list. For example, law and order, land, police, agriculture, gambling. Who has the power to make laws on these subjects? State legislative assemblies. Then there are some items mentioned in the concurrent list. For example, marriage and divorce. For example, education. On all these matters, who has the power to make law? Both parliament as well as states. Long story short, there is a clear-cut distribution of powers. Some powers are given to the center in union list. Some powers are given to the states in state list. Some powers are jointly given to both center as well as states, concurrent list. That means on one hand, we follow dual government in India. On the other hand, we do follow distribution of powers. On the other hand, do we have a written constitution? Yes, we have. One of the lengthiest, bulkiest constitution of the world is the Indian constitution. We have a written constitution. And is our constitution rigid? Yes. How? Do you know of GST? You know it? The year was 2017. GST was to be implemented in this country. Do you know what happened? When this GST bill was passed in the parliament, after that it was not sent to the president directly. This GST bill was sent to all the states of India. And only when more than half of the states accepted GST, then GST was implemented in this country. Then GST was sent to the president for signature. Which means GST, which was a constitutional amendment, GST was introduced into the constitution. This change in the constitution, this amendment of the constitution was not unilaterally done by the center. Parliament was not unilaterally done by the state legislatures. This amendment to the constitution, by introducing GST to the constitution, it was done by the joint act of both center as well as states. Both the center as well as the states, they decided to come together to amend the constitution to provide for GST. What is it? Rigidity of the constitution. That means even condition number 4 we have satisfied. And is our judiciary independent? Yes, it is. Judiciary is independently taking the decision. It is not biased in favor of the center. It's not biased against the states. The judiciary has struck down parliamentary laws as well. Judiciary has struck down state laws as well. So judiciary in India is independent. And all these 5 characteristics which make US Constitution a federal constitution, all these 5 characteristics are also present in Indian Constitution as well. So what is Indian Constitution? Indian Constitution also is federal. But the story doesn't end here. This is just on the surface. Once you dig deeper, you see something else is emerging. What is this something else? If we have dual government, which means government at the center, government in the state as well, but at any point in time, the state government of West Bengal can be dismissed by the center by imposing what is known as President's Rule. And this President's Rule is mentioned under Article 356 of the Constitution. If we have dual government, but at the same time we have the power given to the center, that at any point in time, the president can dismiss a state government by imposing President's Rule under Article 356. So we have dual government, but the center can dismiss a state government as well. State government of West Bengal, UP, Maharashtra, Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, state governments can be dismissed. And more than 111 times Article 356 has been imposed in this country, has been imposed in various states in India. So dual government, dicey. Maybe we don't follow it completely. But even if we don't follow it completely, at least we follow distribution of powers. Union list, state list, concurrent list. But when you look at the wording of this Schedule 7 of the Constitution, you will read that state legislative assemblies have the power to to make a law on any item mentioned in the state list, but only in normal circumstances. What if there are abnormal circumstances? Parliament will have the power to make a law. Which are these abnormal circumstances? That center will decide. So center will decide that there is a state of national emergency under Article 352 of the Constitution, and Parliament will make a law for states as well. Parliament will make a law on any item mentioned in the state list. Whenever there is a financial emergency under Article 360, center will take the control of the money which is available with the states as well. So where is distribution of powers? So dual government, we don't follow completely. Distribution of powers, we don't follow completely. But at least the Constitution is written. But were states consulted when the Constitution was written? No. Can states propose amendment to the Constitution? No. Can state initiate amendment to the Constitution? No. So we have a written Constitution. But to change this written Constitution, states cannot initiate any proposal. But at least our Constitution is rigid. No, it's not. To change fundamental rights, states are not consulted. To change DPSP, states are not consulted. To change a part of the Constitution, states are not consulted. It is only in few matters. It is only in 7 or 8 items. Only 7 or 8 items in the Constitution. If you want to change, you need the permission from the states. Otherwise, bulk of the Constitution, majority of the Constitution can be unilaterally changed by the central Parliament. So how is our Constitution rigid? So dual government, yes or no? Distribution of powers, yes and no. Written Constitution, yes and no. Rigidity of the Constitution, yes and no. But at least the judiciary is independent, isn't it? But who appoints the judge of the Supreme Court? President. Who appoints the Chief Justice of India? President. Who appoints the Chief Justice of a High Court? President. Who appoints the judge of a High Court? President. Who transfers a High Court judge from one High Court of a state to another High Court of a state? President. Who is a president? Head of the central government. And if appointment is done by the center, who removes a judge? President. Who removes a High Court judge? President. Who removes a Supreme Court judge? President. Who removes a Chief Justice of India? President. On the basis of the resolution passed by the Parliament. Only Parliament has the power to initiate a proposal to remove a judge. And once Parliament passes a resolution to remove a judge, the removal order is issued by the President. Can state legislatures remove a judge? No. Can state legislatures recommend removal of a judge? No. So appointment is done by center, removal is done by center. So how can we say that the judiciary is independent? Because the removal authority and the appointment authority both are the same, and that's the center. And don't you think that the judiciary would be biased in favor of the center? Because appointment is done by center, removal is done by the center. So how are we a federal constitution? That is why some people say India is not a federal constitution. India is basically a unitary constitution with some federal features. And the best term that is used for Indian constitution is that it is quasi-federal. Neither completely unitary nor completely federal. But in normal circumstances, we are completely federal. Completely federal in the sense, it's not that suddenly the central government will dismiss a state government. No. It's only when in a state, constitution is violated, center will dismiss that state government. It is not that center will violate this distribution of powers every now and then. It's only when there is war, when there is threat to India's sovereignty, integrity, unity, then Parliament takes control. When war is over, then we go back to a federal polity. We go back to a federal constitution. Which means in normal circumstances, we are federal. When everything is fine, state governments are not dismissed. Only when constitution is violated in a state, that the center is under the obligation to dismiss that state government. It's only when there is a threat to the unity, integrity, sovereignty of India that Parliament takes charge and passes a law on state list. Otherwise, it doesn't happen in normal circumstances. That is why some constitutional experts say that India is unique, just like India. We believe in federalism, but at the same time, national interest is paramount. And what is this national interest? We have to ensure that constitution is being followed in every state. We have to ensure that through war, our territory is not stolen by the enemy. We have to ensure the territorial integrity, sovereignty of India. So during these abnormal situations, our constitution becomes unitary. All the powers are concentrated with the center. But when the situation normalizes, we go back to a federal polity. That is why some people say our system is like amphibian. Sometimes water, sometimes land. Sometimes unitary, sometimes federal. When everything is normal, we are a federal polity. When there is war, when there is external aggression, when there is threat of war, when there is breakdown of constitution in a state, when there is a threat to the financial stability of the nation, it is then that our constitution transforms itself and becomes a unitary constitution. But once the situation normalizes again, we are back to being a federal constitution. So long story short, we understood what is a constitution. What is a constitution? It's a document of people's faith and aspirations. Constitution is the supreme law of land which enjoys special legal sanctity. Constitution can be either written or unwritten, enacted or evolved, unitary or federal. But this category, unitary and federal, we have not discussed entirely. We will keep this question open. And whenever we will discuss various parts of the Constitution, various articles of the Constitution, there I will tell you whether this article supports federal polity or unitary polity. So we will keep this question open. Is India a federal constitution or a unitary constitution? Some people say, Granville Austin says, or the legal luminaries, an expert on Indian constitution, he says that Indian constitution is quasi-federal. Neither completely federal nor completely unitary, or sometimes federal or sometimes unitary. But this discussion, we will keep it open. When we will discuss part 1 of the constitution, we will discuss again unitary and federal feature. In citizenship, we will discuss unitary and federal features. In union executive, union legislature, state executive, state legislature, judiciary, we will discuss whether India is a unitary or a federal constitution. And our entire discussion will be based on India as a federal polity and India as a unitary